What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's transfer tips for game week 17. So I'm going to go through some of the popular players being moved in and out of people's squads and discuss whether they are good moves or not. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. So let's start with Raul Jiménez. Some of you might be looking for a cheap forward this week, and he's down to 5.5 million with Southampton at home in game week 17. Now, I've got him in my own squad, and I think he's a good option moving forward, especially if you need a value player for your front three. But if you want someone that you can rely on to start every single week, Jiménez is not the man for you. At some point over Christmas, because of the fixture congestion, I would expect Jiménez to start as he did against Brighton. But I firmly believe that Jiménez is first choice and will start the majority of games. Some people are worried that Jiménez came off the bench against Liverpool and scored, and that might mean that he takes over as the first choice number 9. But let's not forget that Jiménez scored against Arsenal the game before, took his chance really well, and outside of the goal, just played brilliantly in general with his hold-up play, link-up play, and stuff like that. So I think Jiménez is still first choice. And if you think that one goal off the bench will change that, you might be right. But I think major concern about it is unwarranted, because if you look at Jiménez's scoring record, he also came off the bench in game week 7 and got a goal against Man City. That was just before an international break. Raul Jiménez then went away with Mexico, played on the 16th of October on the international break, and then game week 8 was on the 19th of October, 3 days later, and he played the full 90 minutes against Villa. So I think all-round play, Jiménez is the better player for Fulham. There's a reason he started 12 of the last 13 games. And I think he will continue to be first choice unless something majorly changes. Can I guarantee you that he's going to start that Southampton game? No, because the Chelsea game is 4 days later, and Marco Silva might decide that he wants to play Jiménez in the easier game and save Raul Jiménez for Chelsea. That's a possibility, but with no Carabao Cup this week for Fulham, they've got an 8-day gap between 16 and 17. There is a chance that Jiménez will start, come off early, and then maybe start the Chelsea game as well and possibly miss Bournemouth. My hope as an owner is that it will start 3 of the next 4. Ideally, the 3 home games, Southampton, Bournemouth and Ipswich, and will miss Chelsea. But I think there's a higher chance that he plays the Chelsea game and misses one of the good games. But if he still plays 2 of Southampton, Bournemouth and Ipswich from game week 17 to 20, that's still a good option. And if he remains first choice, you've then got West Ham away in game week 21, Leicester away in game week 22, and then Man United at home, Newcastle away, Forest at home, Palace at home. The fixture run for Fulham is very good, and for 5.5 million, it doesn't really get that much better. I think with João Pedro, you've got a player that will get more minutes over the long run than Jiménez, but the fixtures are a little bit worse. So you kind of bring him in and accept that he's a cheap option. He may not always start. He'll always get subbed off, but it lets you spend money elsewhere. And for that reason, I still think he's a good option to be looking at. So Gabriel was back for Arsenal at the weekend. No attacking returns against Everton, but he did pick up all 3 bonus points and finished on a 9-pointer. And just over 100,000 FPL managers have brought him in ahead of Palace away in 17. I think despite the fixture run that Arsenal have got, if you're sat there with 0 or maybe even just 1 Arsenal defender and you don't have Gabriel, he's still a pretty good transfer in this week. Like Arsenal have over the next 6, Palace away, Brentford away, Brighton away, Spurs at home, Villa at home, which doesn't sound great for defensive returns, but that Arsenal defence is so good, they will pick up some clean sheets in those matches, and you've got the attacking potential on top. So Gabriel is kind of someone you can just leave in and play every single game week, and that's kind of why you pay that premium price versus like a 4.5 million defender. And there's lots of good cheap options right now. Lewis Hall, Colwill, Robinson as well, Munoz in a few weeks. But if you've got the money for a premium spot and you don't own Gabriel, I think he's a nice set and forget option. And if you're looking at an Arsenal defender, there is absolutely no reason to buy William Saliba instead. Yes, he's got 2 goals in the last 3, but Gabriel's goal threat is far superior. And Saliba's more expensive. He's 6.2 million now. He may even go up to 6.3 this week. Gabriel 6.1. There is no reason to buy Saliba over Gabriel unless we get any word about an injury or something like that. And at the time of recording, that hasn't happened. And even to the point with Arsenal defenders, if you've got Gabriel or you don't want him and you want to go for someone else, then it's probably Timber at 5.7 just because he's a little bit cheaper than what Saliba is. So I've got Saliba in my team, fairly happy with him, but he's not someone I would buy right now. The Arsenal defender to get is Gabriel. And I think despite the away games they've got coming up, he's still a really nice option. So it was another attack and return and 90 minutes for Enzo Fernandez at the weekend. He's now had a goal and or an assist in each of his last 6 Premier League matches. He's on a really great run, and at 5.1 million it's becoming difficult to ignore him as that 8th attacker. I'm still not sure I'd like to play him every week as a 7th attacker, but with the fixtures they've got, if it enables you to get all the other players that you want in your team, I don't completely hate it. Like if you're sat there with Saka, Palmer, Salah, maybe Trent, an Arsenal defender and Isak, and the only thing you've had to do to enable all that is to play Enzo every week, it's maybe not the end of the world. He's getting good minutes. The underlying numbers are not bad for a 5.1 million player, and he takes some set pieces as well. I can see why people would want to do that, but ideally he'd be your 8th attacker that you use at times when you need him. I think for those of us that own Rodgers, there's probably still no major concern to have to get rid of him. The fixtures are not amazing coming up, but they're not bad either. After City at home, it's Newcastle away, Brighton at home, Leicester at home. If he can avoid getting that 5th yellow, I still think it warrants keeping him in the team. But he is probably going to drop in price over the next week or two. And so for those of you buying new as an 8th attacker, I probably would look to avoid Rodgers at the moment, maybe someone we can come back to later on. So then the discussion is, do you go for Enzo Fernandez or do you go for Amad Diallo? I think minutes-wise, I'm slightly more confident in Enzo than Amad, even though Amad has looked very good under Amorim. But I think Amad Diallo will more consistently take up attacking positions over the next few weeks, either as a wing-back or playing in the front 3 behind Højlund. So I think my preference with the next 3 fixtures Man United have got is probably Amad Diallo. Longer term, it might be that Enzo is the one, and it's quite nice that Chelsea don't have to play Liverpool. So they've got Everton away, Fulham at home, Ipswich away, Palace away, Bournemouth at home, Wolves at home. The next 6 game weeks look really good. Whereas for Man United and Amad Diallo, also bearing in mind Amad Diallo is 0.1 more expensive at the moment, they do have Bournemouth at home, Wolves away, Newcastle at home, next 3, which look pretty good. But then they've got that Liverpool away game in 20, which is not ideal. But then it is Southampton at home in 21. So I think it's pretty close. I think I'd maybe lean more towards Amad Diallo slightly, but I do think if I was having to guess who's going to play more 90-minute games over the next 6 game weeks, it'd probably be Enzo. Either way, they both look like nice options right now. So Milenković in Nottingham Forest now has 2 goals in 2 games, and at 4.6 million, almost looks a bit like a budget Gabriel. Like Milenkovic's 0.16 expected goals per 90 is quite comparable. Defensively, Forest not as good as Arsenal, of course, but they're not bad either. For me, Milenković feels like one of those players that if you've got him, you're probably holding on to him. But I'm not sure there's a great case to buy him in game week 17. Like Brentford away is not an awful match, but they are finding ways to score plenty of goals this season. Defensively, Brentford are not great at all, and Forest will score in this game. Maybe that will come from Milenković, but I can see them conceding, right? So I don't see a clean sheet. I don't see one against Spurs at home either. Everton away, Wolves away in 19-20 are not that bad. But at that point, Wolves will have a new manager, so they might be a tougher team to play against. And it's not great having so many away games. And then it's Liverpool at home in 21. So in the next 5, you've got 3 away games, and the 2 home ones are Spurs and Liverpool, 2 teams you would expect to score. I know Forest already have a clean sheet against Liverpool away from home, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to repeat itself. So I'm not a big fan of bringing Milenković in, because I think you've got other good cheap options right now, like Lewis Hall, etc. But I think if you had him, there might be a case to keep hold of him if you can bench him in some of those tougher games. Like if I had to play him against Everton away, I wouldn't be that worried. If I had to play him against Wolves away, not the end of the world. And if you do get stuck, where you've got to make another transfer and you can play him instead, you do have that goal threat as well. So for me, he's potentially someone to keep hold of, but I'm not sure I'd be buying a Nottingham Forest defender right now. So Ashley Young continues to be pretty popular. Just over 50,000 FPL managers have brought him into their squad after Everton picked up their 6th clean sheet of the season so far. And I think Ashley Young, like James Maddison, has just gone completely under the radar in terms of how many points he scored so far this season. Comparing him to other defenders, he's on 62 points, the same as Trent Alexander-Arnold. He's only 2 behind Vardy, 3 behind Van Dijk, and only 7 points behind Gabriel. And at 4.7 million, the amount of points he has is an absolute bargain. And if you look at points per match instead of total points, he's actually 3rd behind Gabriel and Dizazi. So he's even ahead of Trent Alexander-Arnold for that. All that being said, would I buy Ashley Young this week? You know what the answer is going to be. Chelsea at home in 17, Man City away in 18. For me, that is a complete avoid. I know the Everton defence is decent. They can make it difficult for teams. I think those of us with Cole Palmer may look elsewhere for captaincy because we're just not quite sure how many returns there will be against this Everton defence. But I think Chelsea will score in that game and Man City will almost certainly score. You could potentially start looking at Everton players from game week 20 where they've got Forest at home, Bournemouth away, Villa at home. But even now, I wouldn't expect a huge amount of clean sheets. Yes, they will probably have that double game week around game weeks 24, 25. But I think it's way too early to be thinking about that for Everton players when the fixture run is so bad. So I know I often say this about certain players and it doesn't come true. But the amount of returns that Ashley Young has had is nowhere near sustainable, and I would expect them to slow down quite a bit. His attacking potential, by the way, is not that bad. 0.1 expected assists per 90 is not terrible whatsoever for a player that costs 4.7, but the fixture run just does not give me any hope there's going to be a huge amount of clean sheets, and without them, the points will start to dry up. So if you're looking at Ashley Young, I would definitely look elsewhere. So a good few of us bought Trent Alexander-Arnold last week for the Fulham game. Obviously, Liverpool ended up conceding twice. No attacking returns for Trent either. That has caused nearly 40,000 FPL managers to take him out of their squad already before the Spurs away game in 17. And I have had a few questions about whether or not he's worth the money. Should you look to get rid of him and spend that cash elsewhere? Spurs away is obviously not great. I don't expect a clean sheet for Liverpool in that match. But the fixture run from 18 onwards for one of the best defences in the league is pretty decent. And I still believe Trent has got decent attacking potential. 3 assists already this season. In terms of expected assists per 90, he's putting up the best numbers in the league. The attacking returns will come, and so will the defensive ones. You could make an argument that Liverpool defence is not as good without Konate. I think that would be fair. But hopefully he's going to be back towards the end of December, start of January anyway. So once that happens, the Liverpool defensive returns will surely improve. You've got that good fixture on. You've got the potential double later. I just think if you take Trent out, he's a transfer back in waiting to happen. And I'm not sure for that reason that it's worth removing him in the first place. I do think for some people, the decision in 16, I know it was the case for me, was to get Trent or Isak. And so if you went Trent and you don't have Isak in your team, that hasn't gone great so far. Now you're up against Trent, Spurs away, with Isak having Ipswich away. It doesn't look great for 17 either. And I get the desire to have Isak. I'd love him in my team as well. But I think preferably you find a different way to fund it. I don't completely hate taking Trent out to fund Isak, or at least I understand why people want to do it. It's just not a move that I would make. So I think for most people, I would just keep hold of him for now. You're going to want him back later if he can remain fit. And at the moment, we've got no reason to believe that won't happen. So another Liverpool defender that's being sold this week is Andrew Robertson. Just over 50,000 FPL managers have already got rid of him before that Spurs game in 17. Just on the red card that he picked up against Fulham. Not ideal, of course, if you're an owner. But even if that doesn't get overturned, he'll serve the suspension in the Carabao Cup. So he's actually available for that Spurs game. And because they've got Leicester at home in 18... I'd be slightly tempted as an owner to keep hold of him if my defence looks okay for 17. I think long term, you've got to get rid of him eventually because Tsimikas will be back and he'll take minutes off of him. And I definitely would not buy Robertson right now. But if you're already an owner with a good defence in 17, keeping him for that Leicester at home game must be pretty tempting. The only thing I would say is just before I started recording this video, Arne Slot held his press conference ahead of the Carabao Cup game against Southampton midweek. And he said that Tsimikas is back in training. Now, obviously, we'll see how many minutes, if any, Tsimikas gets against Southampton and then again against Spurs. But there is a chance that if he gets minutes off the bench against Spurs, that he could be the one that then starts left back against Leicester. So there is some risk involved with keeping Robertson, but the upside is pretty big with that Leicester match. If we look at the gap between games, Spurs away is on Sunday the 22nd and Leicester at home is on the 26th. So if they don't want to take a risk with Tsimikas, there is every chance that Robertson will start the next 2 games and then maybe Tsimikas comes in for West Ham. I just think because on paper Leicester at home is so good, Robertson is potentially worth the upside of holding on to, at least in the short term. But long term, I expect Tsimikas to get too many minutes to make either of them an option. And actually before the injury, it almost looked like Tsimikas was starting to become first choice. So long term, Robertson got to go. I think there is potential upside holding him for that Leicester game. So I said this last week, I'm going to say it again this week. I think at this point, if you've got Ollie Watkins and a spare transfer to move him on, that's probably a pretty good option to take. It was another benching at the weekend. Now, to be fair, Unai Emery did tell us before that Forest game that Watkins was a bit of a doubt and they'd see how he was in training. So the fact he got benched wasn't a complete surprise, and I would expect him to continue to start the majority of games. But when he's not 100%, they don't have to risk him because they've got Duran. And even when he does start, there's a chance of an early benching. So if you ask me whether I think Watkins is going to start the next 6 game weeks, I actually think there's a fairly good chance if he's fully fit and available, because the gap between matches is not that bad. They've got Saturday, Thursday, Monday, Saturday for the next 4 game weeks. But the problem is at 8.9 million, I want a definitive yes to he's definitely going to start all those games, not a there's a possibility that Duran might come in. With Jiménez, there's absolutely a chance that Jiménez will start one of the games. Jiménez will definitely get subbed early, but he's only 5.5 million. So it doesn't feel quite as bad when it happens. With Watkins at 8.9, I just feel like there's very little justification to keep hold of him. The fixtures they've got coming up are not that bad. It's not a bad time to play City. Newcastle away is not terrible. Brighton at home, Leicester at home. Next 4 game weeks pretty good. His underlying numbers are still decent. I just don't think it's worth it for 8.9 million. I'd much rather go to Isak at 8.7 instead. Better fixtures. Looks to be a 90-minute man most games when he's fully fit and available. I know he went off early against Leicester, but the game was comfortable, right? There was no need to leave him on. So, yeah, over 100,000 people have sold Watkins, and I think that's a pretty good move. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Rate 5 stars if you're listening on podcast. I'll be back tomorrow for the game week preview, so I'll catch you then.